I still remember the smell of that night. Gumbo simmering on the stove, a soft hum from the refrigerator, the quiet little heartbeat of the house that, up until that moment, I believed was still ours. It was a Thursday, in a 9:47 p.m. 8 years into a marriage I thought was strong, and then 6 words appeared on my phone and shattered everything I believed in. Don't call or come over. We're done. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. I stared at that message as if it had been written in a language I couldn't understand. My fingers were wet from washing vegetables. Tiny water droplets slid down the glass of my phone as I reread those words again, and again, and again. For a few long seconds, my brain refused to process it. The wooden spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the pot. Hot gumbo splashed across the stove. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there still in my apron, hair tied back, surrounded by the quiet sounds of my own life while my marriage crumbled through a glowing screen. 8 years of promises dissolved into pixels. I sank to the floor, tile cold against my legs. The phone light burned against my eyes. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. And yet, for some reason I'll never quite understand, my fingers moved automatically. I typed out 2 words. Got it. No begging, no question, no fight. Just got it. The message went through instantly. A tiny gray check mark. Then another delivered. And then the 3 dots appeared. They blinked, stopped, blinked again. And then nothing. Silence. I sat there until the clock on the microwave blinked 10:03. The gumbo had burned. The house smelled like scorched rue. My hands smelled like garlic and onions. And the man I thought I'd grow old with had just ended our life together with a single line of text. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Instead, I stared at the quiet, ordinary kitchen, the one we'd painted together, the one where he'd held me from behind, while I cooked, whispering about our future children, and it all suddenly felt like someone else's life. And then the second blow came. My phone buzzed again. I scrambled to grab it, hope sparking foolishly in my chest. But it wasn't Derek. It was our bank app. A $4,200 withdrawal, 3 hours earlier. I opened the banking app, fingers shaking, and my stomach dropped. There they were, rows of transactions, dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges from places across town, jewelry purchases from a store I'd never stepped inside, all neatly dated, all while he was working late. 3 months. 3 months of lies sitting in my palm like evidence in a courtroom I never asked to walk into. I called him anyway, once. Voicemail, twice, blocked. I sat there again, just like I had minutes earlier. Only this time, something inside me shifted. Sadness twisted into something sharper, a kind of cold clarity I hadn't felt before. He wasn't just leaving, he was robbing me on his way out. I didn't cry then. I stood up, wiped my face with the back of my hand, walked to the laptop in the living room like I was floating outside my own body, and within 15 minutes, I moved half of everything we'd built together into my personal account. The one I'd kept from before the marriage, the one he'd once told me to close because married people shouldn't keep secrets. I guess a part of me had always known to keep a lifeline. $6,800 from savings, $3,200 from checking, half of the money market. Click, transfer, confirm. When the final confirmation pinged, something inside me stilled. A fragile, almost dangerous calm. The kind that isn't made of peace, but of resolve. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase him down. I wasn't going to break. He'd taken enough from me already. I packed slowly, methodically, like I was peeling myself out of a shared life layer by layer. A suitcase of clothes. The pearl earrings my grandmother gave me. The photo albums from before Derek. Legal documents. Birth certificate. My own toothbrush. I stood in our bedroom, the one we painted warm beige after weeks of arguing over shades, and let my eyes trace everything. The nightstand with his cufflinks. The lamp with the tiny chip from when we moved in. The bed where we'd whispered dreams into the dark. And then I turned away. At midnight, I locked the door behind me. I didn't look back. I drove through the streets of a neighborhood I'd believed would be my forever home. Past the park where we used to walk on Sundays. Past the coffee shop where he'd told me he loved me. Every turn felt like closing a door in my heart. I didn't know it then, but it wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of the woman I used to be. Nayan's porch light was still on when I pulled up. My mother has never been the type to go to bed early. She's a night owl, the kind who stays up watching true crime shows. Her purple robe wrapped tight around her, braids tucked under a silk scarf, coffee mug still warm in her hand. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Mothers know. Baby, she whispered. Just that. One word. And it undid me. The tears I'd held back all night came flooding out, hot and relentless. I fell into her arms like a child again, suitcase abandoned on the porch. She held me with the same rhythm she did when I fell off my bike at 5 years old, the same strength that held me when Dad died, the same warmth that reminded me I still belonged somewhere. Inside, the house smelled like lemon furniture polish and lavender sachets. My childhood home, safe, constant. She sat me down on the couch, wrapped a blanket over my shoulders, and handed me a cup of hot tea because in my mother's world, everything starts with tea. He sent me a text, I said finally, my voice hoarse. 6 words, don't call or come over. We're done. That's it, after 8 years. Her jaw tightened. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just let me keep talking. And the money. Mama, he took the money. 4,000 here. Jewelry, hotels, dinners. All those nights I thought he was working late. Did you move your half? She interrupted softly. Yes, I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. I got it out. She squeezed my hand. Good girl. I raised you right. And then, like the mother she has always been, she disappeared into the kitchen. I could hear the kettle again, the cupboards, the rhythm of home. While the world I'd built with Derek was collapsing, hers had never once stopped standing. I tried to sleep that night in my old room. It was strange, like stepping back in time. The green walls I'd painted as a teenager, the same quilt she'd sewn, the bookshelf filled with dusty yearbooks. The bed felt smaller than I remembered, but safer. No ghosts here. Still, I woke up at 3 a.m. Restless, I padded downstairs in an old t-shirt, the one Mama had kept all these years. The kitchen light was on. Of course it was. She was at the table, Bible open, a notebook beside her filled with her neat, looping handwriting. Can't sleep either? I whispered. Been praying, she said. And making a list. A list of what? Everything you need to do. First thing tomorrow, you call Camille Green. Divorce attorney. She goes to church with us. She'll take care of you. Then we call the bank. Freeze the joint accounts. Change passwords, cancel memberships, everything. You're not walking into this fight blind. I stared at her, my 8-year-old mother with her lavender robe, calm as ever, already 5 steps ahead of me. How do you know all this? I asked. Your Aunt Rita, 15 years ago. Her husband ran off with some woman he met at work. We didn't let him take everything, and I won't let yours either. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just my battle, it was ours. I laid my head on the table, exhausted, and whispered, I thought he loved me. Maybe he did, Mama said quietly. But baby, love isn't supposed to destroy you. It's supposed to build you. And right then, in the middle of that old kitchen, at 3 a.m., with my mother's steady hand on mine, I stopped trying to understand why he left. I started thinking about what I would do next. The morning came softly. I woke to the smell of bacon and cinnamon toast. Mama's kitchen has always been the warmest place in the world. The sun poured through the window like it didn't care that my marriage had just ended. Life kept moving, even if I wasn't ready. I sat at the table, half awake, and she set a plate in front of me. You've got a lawyer to meet today, she said, as if we were talking about a dental appointment. Can't do that on an empty stomach. I stared at her, at the woman who had built strength in silence. And I knew then I wasn't going to drown. Not with her in my corner. It's strange how endings don't always look like you expect them to. I thought divorce would start with shouting, with slammed doors, with a fight. But mine started with a text message, a burned pot of gumbo, a midnight drive back to my mama's porch, and the quiet, steady hands of a woman who refused to let me fall. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night I stopped being Derek's wife and started becoming me again. Because sometimes it only takes 6 words to end a marriage. But it only takes one decision to reclaim your life. And I had already made mine. If the night my marriage ended was quiet and cold, the morning after was warm. Too warm, too safe. It was strange, really, how the world didn't stop, how the sun rose like nothing had changed, how my mother still fried bacon and scrambled eggs as if my life hadn't crumbled in a single text message. I sat at her kitchen table in an oversized t-shirt, hair tied in a loose knot, eyes swollen from crying. The window over the sink was fogged from the steam of her cooking, and the smell of cinnamon toast filled the room. I used to love this smell. It meant safety. It meant home. And now, it meant survival. She placed a plate in front of me without asking whether I was hungry. Eat, she said. Not softly, not kindly, but with the same authority she used when I was a stubborn teenager, refusing to eat my greens. Mama, I started. Eat? She repeated. So, I did. Slowly, bite by bite, like a soldier taking orders. Her kitchen was always more than a room. It was a command center. Warm yellow curtains, pot holders she'd sewn by hand, a cracked ceramic rooster on the counter that had been there since I was 10. This house hadn't changed in decades, and that was the beauty of it. It was a place that held me up when the rest of the world was falling apart. You don't have to say anything yet, she said as she sat across from me with her own plate. Right now, your job is to breathe. That was Mama. Simple, unshakable, a storm shelter in human form. But breathing felt strange. The air didn't feel the same as it had 2 days ago. I was no longer a wife. I was untethered, floating. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was warm, her palm calloused from years of living. She didn't need words, her touch was enough. I hadn't realized until then just how tightly I'd been holding myself together, And just like that, the tears came again. Hot, silent, unstoppable. "You can fall apart here," she whispered. "That's what mamas are for." She said it like it was a promise, and I believed her. I folded into her arms, just like I had when I was little when the world felt too big. She held me, steady and quiet, her hand moving in slow circles against my back, the same rhythm she used to soothe me as a child after nightmares. Only this time, the monster wasn't under the bed. He had my last name. "I can't believe he did this," I sobbed into her shoulder. 8 years, Mama. 8 years, and he ended it like it was nothing. She didn't say, "I told you so," though she could have. She didn't remind me of her warnings, of how fast Derek and I had rushed into marriage. She didn't throw my heartbreak back at me. She just held me and let me grieve. "Let it out," she murmured. "All of it, every tear. Don't you dare carry his weight in silence." And I did. I cried until my throat ached, until the cinnamon toast went cold, until I had nothing left to give to the sadness. Only then did she pull back, wipe my tears with her thumb like I was still her baby girl, and say in that calm, steel-edged voice, "Now we make a plan. If there's one thing about my mother, it's that she doesn't panic. She plans." She grabbed the same notebook she'd had open the night before. Her handwriting was neat, precise, and patient like the woman herself. I watched as she flipped to the second page, where an entire list had already formed. 1. Lawyer Camille Green call today 2. Freeze joint accounts 3. Change passwords, utilities, memberships 4. Collect documents 5. Keep records of everything 6. No contact without legal counsel. You already wrote this down, I said. She nodded. I started the moment I saw your face on that porch. You didn't even know what happened. She gave me a look only a mother could give. I knew enough. When a man throws away a good woman, he doesn't do it clean. He does it dirty. And we don't let him walk away without consequences. For the first time since that awful text, something sparked inside me. It wasn't quite strength yet, but it was something close. Camille goes to our church, Mama continued. She's handled more messy divorces than I can count. She's good. She fights smart. I already texted her this morning. She can see you this afternoon. I blinked at her. Mama, I just woke up. Yes, baby. And the world doesn't stop for heartbreak. There it was again, that matter-of-fact tone. She wasn't rushing me to heal. She was preparing me to fight. After breakfast, we spent the rest of the morning pulling threads out of the life I'd built with Derek. I called the bank to report the withdrawals and freeze our joint accounts. The woman on the phone spoke in that calm, customer service voice, but I could hear something soft in her tone when she said, "I'm sorry you're going through this." I changed passwords on every shared account we'd ever made, Netflix, utilities, the mortgage, the car insurance. It felt strange. Like erasing his fingerprints one login at a time. Mama sat across from me, making her own list, muttering under her breath like a general planning a war campaign. "Do you have copies of the house deed?" "In the file cabinet." "What about your retirement account?" "In my email." "And that car? It's in both your names, right?" "Yes." "Good. We'll get everything in order." "When that lawyer sees you, she's going to have a stack of evidence as tall as her desk." I almost laughed through the ache in my chest. This woman wasn't just my mother, she was my army. Around noon, I found myself sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the yard I grew up playing in. The world outside looked the same, kids riding bikes, Mrs. Patterson watering her plants across the street, cars passing by with their radios low, but I wasn't the same. I was different now, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. I thought of Derek's message. 6 words, how clean and cruel they'd been, how final. And then I thought of how quiet I'd been when I replied, got it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. At the time, it felt like surrender. Now it felt like the beginning of something else. Simone? Mama's voice came through the screen door. You've got that look again. What look? The one your daddy used to get right before he decided to build something from nothing. I turned to face her. Mama, what if I can't rebuild? She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a small smile playing at her lips. Baby, you already started. You packed your bags, you came home. You didn't let him take everything. That's not weakness, that's the start of your comeback. And just like that, my spine straightened. Not fully, but enough. When we drove to Camille's office that afternoon, I held Mama's hand like I used to on the first day of school. My heart was pounding. My palms were slick. It felt like walking into a storm I wasn't ready for. But Mama? She looked like she was walking into church. You don't have to do this alone, she said as we pulled into the parking lot. You don't ever have to do anything alone again. I looked at her, at the woman who raised me, who'd weathered her own storms, who didn't flinch at mine. And in that moment, I felt a surge of gratitude so sharp it made my chest ache, because not everyone has a mama like mine. Inside the waiting room, soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Artwork from local black artists lined the walls. It didn't feel like a law office, it felt safe. I clutched my bag against my chest like armor. Mrs. Carter? A receptionist said with a warm smile. Miss Green is ready for you. I took a breath that felt too big for my lungs. Mama squeezed my hand once, the way she always did right before something big. You're gonna be fine, she whispered, and I believed her, because I wasn't just walking into that office as a woman who'd been left. I was walking in as a woman who still had something fierce behind her, a mother's love, a kitchen filled with cinnamon toast, and a plan scribbled neatly in a notebook. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start fighting back. Later that night, after the meeting, after the paperwork, after the steady voice of Camille Green telling me I was going to be okay, I sat on Mama's porch again. The air was cooler, the stars were out. The cicadas sang in the dark. I held a cup of tea between my palms, letting the warmth sink in. She joined me quietly, wrapping her own shawl around her shoulders. You know, she said softly, when your daddy died, I thought I'd never breathe again. Thought life ended with him, but it didn't. I rebuilt. Took years, but I did. And you will too. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. Yes, you do, she said. You already have. You just don't see it yet. I leaned against her shoulder like I used to when I was small. For the first time in 24 hours, the ache in my chest loosened just a little. I didn't have to be strong alone. I didn't have to have the answers yet. I just had to keep breathing. And Mama would hold me until I could walk again. Some moments split your life in two. There's the before, when you still believe love will protect you. And then there's the after, when you realize love won't save you, but your own spine will. The day I walked into Camille Green's office was the day I crossed that line. Mama insisted on coming with me. Not because I couldn't do it alone, but because she knew I shouldn't have to. She sat beside me in the passenger seat of her old Toyota, hands folded calmly in her lap while I tried to keep mine from trembling on the steering wheel. The entire drive, I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I didn't want to cry anymore, but my body hadn't gotten the memo. Grief has a way of sneaking up when you're trying to be brave. Breathe, baby, Mama said softly as we stopped at a red light. You don't have to carry this like a boulder. I nodded, but inside, it felt exactly like that. A weight pressing against my chest, heavy and unrelenting. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of promises, 8 years of trust, now reduced to legal paperwork and bank statements. I wasn't walking into this meeting as a wife anymore. I was walking in as a woman preparing for war. Camille's office didn't look like what I expected. No cold marble floors, no intimidating desks, no sterile, silent halls. Instead, warm, earth-toned walls greeted us. The scent of jasmine hung faintly in the air. Framed portraits of black women, strong, soft, victorious, lined the hallway. It felt less like walking into a battlefield, and more like stepping into a sanctuary. The receptionist smiled as if she'd been expecting me all along. Mrs. Carter, Miss Green is ready for you. Right through that door. I wasn't ready, but I walked anyway. Camille stood when we entered. She was tall around Mama's height with rich brown skin, short natural curls, and the kind of posture that said, I don't lose easily. Her eyes were sharp but kind. The kind of woman who could hold a sword in one hand and offer you a hand with the other. Simone, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I'm Camille. Sit, both of you. The sound of her voice, steady, confident, felt like an anchor. Would you like some water? Tea, she asked. Water, I managed. My throat was dry from holding too much inside. She poured me a glass and handed it to me herself, not through an assistant, not rushed. Already, I felt like she saw me not as a case, but as a woman standing on the edge of something devastating. I know this isn't easy, she said. But you're here. That means you've already done the hardest part. I didn't feel brave, but maybe bravery didn't always look like what I thought it did. Maybe sometimes it was just showing up. She leaned back in her chair, legal pad in hand. Start from the beginning. Everything you can remember. Don't filter it. Don't worry about what matters legally. Just talk. So, I did. I told her about the text message, about the $4,200 withdrawal, about the jewelry, the hotel charges, the blocked number, about sitting on the kitchen floor while the gumbo burned. I told her about moving the money, driving to Mama's, the sleepless night, and Mama's list. My voice cracked in the middle, but Camille didn't interrupt. She let me unravel every piece of the story, collecting the threads with quiet precision. When I finally fell silent, she nodded. Good. That gives us a solid foundation. She flipped through her notes like a general, assessing a battle map. Here's what we're dealing with. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets are divided fairly, not always equally. But when one spouse drains accounts or spends marital money on an affair, she looked up at me. That's called dissipation of assets. And judges don't like that. What Derek did, it works in your favor. I exhaled shakily. It does? Oh yes, very much so. He's practically gift-wrapped your case for me. Something in my chest loosened the tiniest flicker of relief. Here's what I need from you, Camille continued, now in her element. Every financial statement you can get your hands on. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, insurance, the mortgage, car titles, retirement. Everything. I can do that. Good. Next, any evidence of his affair. Dates, transactions, screenshots, anything you can remember. You said hotel charges, dinners, jewelry. That's a trail. We'll make it work for us. Her voice was like steel wrapped in silk, unshakable but never harsh. Does he own anything in his name only? I nodded. A Lexus. Bought 2 years ago. And his 401 key. That's marital property too, she said without hesitation. Even if it's only in his name, he doesn't get to walk away with the good stuff while you're left holding air. She flipped another page. Do you work? I'm an administrator at Mercy General, $60,000 a year. And him? 90, tech company. Project manager. She tapped her pen thoughtfully. Given the income difference and length of your marriage, we can file for temporary support. It's not about punishing him. It's about leveling the field. I don't want his money, I blurted out. It came out sharper than I expected. She raised an eyebrow, not judging, just steady. I understand, but hear me. This isn't about pride. It's about your rights. Don't let him rob you twice, once emotionally, once financially. Mama murmured her agreement softly beside me. Take what you're owed, baby. For the first time in days, I sat up a little straighter. This wasn't just a story where I was the woman left behind. This was a story where I could fight. Camille outlined everything in clear, firm steps. 1. File for divorce and temporary orders. 2. Freeze all joint accounts legally. 3. Secure the house and request exclusive use. 4. Demand disclosure of his location, income, and assets. 5. Build the case brick by brick. Derek might think he can just walk away, Camille said, her voice sharpening slightly. But marriage is a legal contract. He doesn't get to break it without consequences. And I intend to make sure he feels them. Her words, I didn't know it then, but they were like water finding cracks in concrete. They seeped into places inside me that had been cracked open by grief, and they started to harden into resolve. How long will it take? I asked. Best case, 31 days if he agrees. Worst case? A year. But don't let the timeline scare you. Every day we work, we build your foundation stronger. I nodded slowly. And Simone, she added, softer now, you don't need to talk to him anymore. Not one word, not one apology, not one confrontation. I'll handle it. He made the mess. He can face me. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For days, I'd been tangled in the silent storm of what I should or shouldn't say to Derek. The idea that I didn't have to say anything at all, that I could step out of that ring and let someone else hold the shield for a while, felt like oxygen. When we left the office, the sun was lower in the sky. Warm light spilled across the parking lot like gold. Mama walked beside me without speaking. She didn't need to. I leaned against the car for a moment, looking at the fading light. I started. Say it, she said. I feel strong, I admitted, almost surprised at my own words. She smiled. That's because you are. That night, I sat in Mama's living room with a cup of tea, laptop open, papers scattered across the coffee table. Pay stubs, bank statements, emails. I was gathering ammunition, not for revenge, but for reclamation. For years, I had built a life around Derek. Now, I was building something else, a defense, a future. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I didn't name it divorce or evidence. I named it freedom. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. No messages, no apologies, just silence. And for once, the silence didn't ache the same way. It wasn't a void, it was a boundary. When I closed my eyes that night, my heart still hurt. But underneath the pain, something new was taking root, a kind of strength I hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't come from someone loving you. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but I've learned something they don't say often enough. It also takes a village to hold a broken woman together. I thought I was strong because I could survive alone. But it turns out, real strength sometimes looks like letting people show up for you, even when all you want to do is lock the door and cry. The day after I met with Camille, Mama made a few phone calls. She didn't ask me first. She didn't wait for permission. She just picked up her phone and said 3 simple words: "She needs us." By the afternoon, my front porch looked like a reunion. There was Rhonda, my best friend since sophomore year of high school, fiery, loud, and loyal, like a pit bull in hoop earrings. She came storming through the door, carrying a box of donuts and a bottle of wine, as if both were equally necessary for survival. Behind her was Aunt Jo, Mama's younger sister, the family's unofficial fixer. If something went wrong, Jo knew somebody who could help. And then came Trina and Val, 2 of Mama's church sisters, the kind who could pray down a storm and bake a casserole at the same time. And just like that, the house where silence had been my only company for the last few days, was full of voices again. Rhonda found me sitting on the couch, hair still messy from the night before, surrounded by Camille's neatly stacked legal folders. She plopped down next to me, handed me a jelly donut, and said, "Girl, eat, cry, curse. I'm here for all of it." I laughed, a shaky, unexpected sound. "Don't make me laugh," I warned. "I'll start crying again." "Then cry," she said, popping a piece of donut in her mouth. "You've got tears, I've got snacks. We're good." That's the thing about Rhonda. She never tried to fix me. She just sat in the hole with me, no questions asked. You should have seen her face. Mama called from the kitchen, where she and Aunt Jo were unloading casseroles like we were preparing for a week-long siege. When she got here that night, heartbroken but steady, I knew she'd be fine. "Of course she will," Rhonda said. "Simone's tougher than a preacher's wife during offering time." That made me snort through my tears. "You're so stupid and loyal," she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. Trina and Val settled in like they'd been planning this for years. They moved around Mama's kitchen with the ease of women who had built their lives side by side, stirring pots, setting out plates, pouring iced tea, folding napkins like love letters. The scent of collard greens and cornbread filled the air, wrapping itself around me like a warm hug. It felt like home, like church potlucks, like safety. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the sound of people just being around me. After years of living with a man who'd grown distant, quiet, and cold, I'd gotten used to silence. So used to it, in fact, that I'd mistaken it for peace. But this noise was peace. "So," Rhonda said, after swallowing a mouthful of sweet tea, "you ready to talk about it?" I hesitated. My throat tightened at the thought of saying it all out loud again. She reached for my hand. "You don't have to give me the pretty version, Simone. Give me the ugly one." So I did. I told them everything: the text, the bank withdrawals, the hotel charges. I told them about sitting on the kitchen floor with burned gumbo and shaking hands, about Mama's porch light, about Camille's calm, surgical dismantling of my panic. When I finished, there was a beat of silence, the kind that isn't empty, it's full. Full of love, outrage, and the collective inhale of women who've seen enough to understand pain when they hear it. Rhonda's jaw clenched. "I swear, if that man was standing right here, I'd baptize him in holy water and my fist." "Now, Rhonda," Mama said gently, "we're going to handle this the right way." "Oh, I know," Rhonda said, waving her hand. "I'm just saying, if a shoe accidentally flies across the room and hits him, I won't be mad." Aunt Jo chimed in with her trademark dry humor. Honey, I know a cousin who can make that shoe disappear. We all burst out, laughing the kind that doesn't come easy when your heart is shattered. But it came anyway. And that laugh didn't just lighten the room. It reminded me I was still here. Laughter with women like these has power. It doesn't erase pain. It holds it. It gives it room to breathe without letting it swallow you whole. I sat there between Rhonda's easy humor and Mama's quiet strength, surrounded by casseroles and prayer warriors, and I felt something I hadn't felt in days. I wasn't alone. Later that evening, after plates were cleaned and casseroles were neatly packed into the fridge, the women gathered in the living room. No one suggested it. It just happened naturally, like water finding its level. Mama dimmed the lights and lit one of her old lavender candles. Val, who led prayer circles at church, took my hand first. Then Trina. Then Aunt Jo. Then Rhonda. Their hands were warm, strong, familiar. Val's voice was soft but sure. Lord, you see your daughter Simone. You know the storm she's walking through. But we know storms don't last forever. Cover her, protect her, remind her she's already stronger than what tried to break her. My eyes burned. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks, but for the first time, they didn't sting with despair. They flowed with something steadier, something I could hold. When the prayer ended, Rhonda squeezed my hand. You hear that, girl? God's got you, but so do we. And in that moment, I believed her. When the last car pulled out of Mama's driveway that night, the house was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet I'd known before. This quiet felt full. Like the echoes of laughter and whispered prayers were still floating through the air. Like the women who had shown up weren't really gone, they'd just gone home to rest, so they could keep standing with me tomorrow. Mama came into the living room, wrapped her robe tighter around herself, and sat down beside me on the couch. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned back, the way she always does when she's proud of something but too humble to admit it. Thank you, I whispered. She glanced at me sideways. For what? For all of this? She smiled. Baby, we were just being your people. I stared at the candle still flickering on the coffee table. I thought about Derek, about how he'd convinced me slowly, quietly to shrink my world to just him, about how he'd made me feel like meeting people was weakness. But sitting here now, surrounded by the ghost of my village, I knew the truth. What he called weakness was actually my greatest strength. He left me, but I still had a world. A loud, laughing, casserole-carrying, prayer-slinging world. I went to bed that night in my old childhood room. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt held. And somewhere between my tears and the soft hum of cicadas outside my window, I made myself a quiet promise. I will not let this break me, because I had people who refused to let me fall. The first time I saw Derek again, it wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't at mediation. It wasn't in some carefully planned confrontation. He showed up on Mama's porch. It was one of those slow Georgia mornings where the sun comes up soft, not hot yet, just gold and gentle. Mama was watering the hydrangeas in her robe. I was sitting on the steps with a cup of coffee, wrapped in one of her knitted shawls. For the first time in weeks, my breathing had started to find its own rhythm again. And then I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. A black Lexus pulled up to the curb. His Lexus. I didn't need to see his face to know. I felt it in my chest before I even turned around. That sound used to mean my husband was home. Now it felt like the ghost of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Mama saw it too. She set down the watering can slowly, her back straightening like a soldier preparing for Battle. Derek stepped out wearing that same pressed white shirt he used to wear on Fridays, like nothing had changed, but everything had. He looked around the yard like he owned the air, like the world would just snap back into place because he'd arrived. "Simone," he said, voice soft, too soft. The way people talk when they want to pretend they didn't burn everything down. I didn't move from the steps. I didn't run toward him. I didn't cry. I just took a slow sip of my coffee. Mama crossed her arms, her robe catching the sunlight, and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own kind of warning. He walked closer, shoulders squared, but I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of something he hadn't felt before. Uncertainty. He wasn't used to walking toward me and not finding the woman who would bend to meet him halfway. "Can we talk?" he asked. I looked up at him. About what? He hesitated just for a second, like he hadn't actually thought that far ahead. "About us." "There is no us, Derek," I said quietly. The words came out steady. No tremble, no crack. Just truth. He took a breath and crouched slightly, like lowering himself would soften what he'd done. "Look, I know I messed up. I know the way I ended things wasn't right." Wasn't right. That was how he described breaking my heart over a 6-word text message, like he'd forgotten to take out the trash. I stared at him, and for the first time since everything happened, I didn't see the man I used to love. I saw the man who left me sitting on a cold kitchen floor with burned gumbo and shaking hands. "You didn't mess up," I said. "You ended a marriage. There's a difference. Simone, come on. Don't do this." "Oh, I'm doing it." He blinked. He wasn't used to this version of me. The one who didn't fold just because he asked. Mama cleared her throat from the top of the steps. "I'll give y'all a minute," she said, though the look in her eyes made it clear. She wasn't going far. She walked inside, leaving the screen door cracked just enough to remind him she was right there. Derek shifted on his feet. "Look," he started, running his hand over his jaw. "I just need to explain." "No," I interrupted, standing up slowly. "You don't. You need to listen." His mouth opened like he was about to argue, but something in the way I looked at him must have shut it right back down. I stepped closer, not too close. Just enough to meet his eyes without flinching. "When you sent me that text, you didn't just end a marriage, you ended my trust, my safety, my home. And then you disappeared. You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't check if I had a place to go. You didn't care." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I snapped, the edge finally cutting through. "You chose the coward's way out, a text, Derek. After 8 years. He swallowed hard, guilt flickering across his face. But guilt doesn't fix anything. It doesn't rebuild. It doesn't erase. He tried to reach for my hand. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I stepped back. "No," I said firmly. That one word hit him harder than anything else I'd said. He'd always known me as soft, patient, forgiving. But soft women can build spines out of steel when they've had enough. "I came here to make things right," he said, frustration leaking into his voice. I tilted my head. "You didn't come here to make things right. You came here because you're starting to realize what you lost." The truth landed between us like a dropped brick, heavy, unavoidable. I could see it all over him, the calculation, the shock of my calm, the way his fingers twitched like he was trying to pull back control. But control wasn't his anymore. "Simone, please. Can't we at least talk like adults?" he said, his voice breaking into that practiced charm I used to fall for. "I am talking like an adult," I replied. "I'm just not begging." For a split second, the mask slipped. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. I saw the man who used to make me doubt myself. The one who'd twist words into knots until I thought I was the problem. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I folded my arms and said quietly, "Whatever this is, it's not happening here. Not on Mama's porch, not after what you did." "So that's it?" "Yes," I said. "That's it." Right then, Mama pushed the screen door open again, as if she could feel the tension thicken. She didn't say a word. She just stepped out, robe flowing like armor. Derek straightened his back, suddenly remembering whose house he was on. "You heard her," Mama said. "This porch doesn't welcome men who leave their wives in the rain." "Mama," I started softly. "No," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I raised my daughter to know her worth. And if you didn't see it when you had her, that's your burden to live with." He glanced between us, me with my quiet strength, her with her unshakable presence, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, not the kind that comes from danger. The kind that comes from realizing you've lost something you can't buy back. He took a step backward, then another. He looked like a man trying to figure out how the world shifted underneath him without him noticing. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he muttered finally. "Good," I said simply. He hesitated, maybe expecting me to break, to cry, to reach for him like I used to when I still believed we could fix things. But I didn't. I just turned back to my coffee on the step. And that was the moment he finally understood. I didn't belong to his story anymore. When his car disappeared down the road, Mama exhaled slowly and sat next to me. "She didn't ask what," he said. "She didn't need to. She'd heard enough." "You did good," she said. I stared at the quiet street, feeling the tremor of what had just happened sink into my bones. I thought I'd fall apart if I saw him. "You didn't," she said. "You stood, and I had. Not with a scream, not with a scene, but with the kind of calm that comes when you stop asking for crumbs and remember you deserve the feast." That night, I sat on the porch alone after Mama went to bed. The stars were out, the air was warm. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and let the silence settle. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who would have begged for answers, the one who would have crumbled in his arms, the one who measured her worth through his love. She wasn't here anymore. And for the first time, I didn't mourn her. I was proud of her. Proud of the way she walked out of that kitchen, proud of the way she held her ground on this porch, proud of the way she was learning to breathe again. This wasn't closure. This was a beginning. Some truths don't come gently. They don't knock on your door softly. They crash in, loud, messy, uninvited. For weeks after Derek showed up on Mama's porch, I'd been bracing myself for the storm, the legal fights, the paperwork, the courtroom. But I wasn't ready for her. The other woman. Her name was Tasha. And the day I met her started like any other ordinary Tuesday, which, looking back now, is almost cruel how the biggest moments in life rarely arrive with warning bells. They just slip into your day like they've always belonged there. I was at Mercy General, halfway through my lunch break, sitting in the small courtyard behind the hospital. The air smelled like wet earth after a light drizzle, and the sky was that dull, forgiving gray. I was stirring cold soup I wasn't really eating, replaying Camille's latest updates in my head. We were preparing for the first court date Derek had filed a response, full of self-pity and carefully worded lies. I'd spent the last few nights sitting at Mama's kitchen table with Camille on speakerphone, going through line after line. My heart had grown tired, but my spine had grown stronger. I thought I was finally finding my footing again. Then I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the courtyard, nervously shifting from foot to foot. Black blazer, red heels, braids pulled into a neat bun. She didn't look like a stranger to herself, she looked like someone who'd practiced being composed. But her hands betrayed her, fidgeting against her bag strap. "Simone?" she said softly. I frowned. "Yes?" She took a small step forward, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I'm Tasha." The name didn't register at first. It floated between us like a leaf that hadn't landed yet. But when it did land, when my brain pieced it together, it was like a small, sharp crack across my chest. Tasha! The name I'd seen on the hotel reservation receipts. The name on those dinner charges. The name behind months of betrayal. I should have felt rage. The old me probably would have. But standing there, looking at her, she wasn't what I expected. She didn't have that smug movie villain look. She wasn't dripping in confidence or laughter at my pain. She looked broken, scared. Like she, too, had walked into something she didn't understand. "Do you have a minute?" she asked quietly. "Please." I didn't owe her anything. I didn't owe her words, time, or grace. But something in her voice that trembled just beneath the surface made me nod. We sat across from each other at the small metal table. For a while, neither of us spoke. She was the first to break the silence. I didn't know. My throat tightened. Didn't know what. She looked down at her hands, her red nails chipped at the edges. That he was married. A bitter laugh escaped me. Not because it was funny. Nothing about this was funny, but because of how absurd it sounded. "Of course he didn't tell you," I said. "Derek only tells the truth when it benefits him." She nodded, her eyes welling up. "I met him at a conference last year. He said he was divorced, said you were some crazy ex who wouldn't let him go." I stiffened. Of course, that's what he said. Classic Derek, building a story where he was the victim. "I swear to you," she said, voice breaking now. The second I found out, I ended it. But by then, it was already too late. I wanted to hate her. I'd rehearsed that hate in my head for weeks. I thought she'd be the face of everything that was taken from me. But sitting there, watching her hands shake, I realized something that surprised me. She wasn't my enemy. She was just another woman who'd been lied to by the same man. "How did you find me?" I asked finally. She swallowed hard. "He's been trying to get me to talk to him again. He said things weren't that bad between you two. He even tried to show me some court papers like I'd feel sorry for him." I clenched my jaw. He was still spinning stories, even now, even after shattering my world. "But that's not why I came," she said quickly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small black USB drive, placing it gently on the table between us. "This is..." I stared at it. "What is that?" "Everything," she whispered. "Text messages, photos, emails, recordings, things he said about you, about the money, about what he was planning. I couldn't keep it anymore. I thought, maybe you'd need it." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The small silver stick on the table looked so innocent, but it was heavy. It held months of secrets, lies, proof. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. She looked up at me, then really looked at me. "Because he hurt both of us, and I'm done being a part of his mess." We sat there and got silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was something else, like two soldiers recognizing each other's wounds without needing to compare scars. She told me bits of the story. How he'd taken her to the same restaurants he used to take me. How he'd used the same words, the same jokes, the same late-night charm. How he'd painted himself as a man escaping a cruel, bitter wife. He'd built 2 lives like castles made of sugar, beautiful until the rain came. And now they were crumbling. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I really am." I believed her. Not because I was naive, but because pain recognizes pain, and hers was real. "You don't owe me an apology," I said softly. "He does." She laughed, bitter, tired. "Yeah. Good luck getting that." We exchanged numbers, not as friends, but as 2 women who refused to stay silent anymore. Before she left, she touched my arm lightly. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "I could tell the moment you said my name." And then she walked away, red heels clicking against the pavement. When I got home that night, Mama was in the kitchen stirring a pot of stew. The house smelled like thyme and garlic. Warm. Safe. She turned when she saw me. "You've got that look again," she said. "What look?" "The one that says something big happened." I sat at the table, pulled the USB drive from my bag, and set it down in front of her. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Truth," I said simply. Camille came over an hour later. We plugged the drive into my laptop. And there it was. Hundreds of messages. Hotel receipts. Pictures. Voice notes where Derek told her things that made my skin crawl, how he was almost free, how I was too predictable to fight, how he'd make sure I didn't see a dime. Mama's jaw tightened. Camille's pen moved across her notepad like lightning. "This is gold," Camille said finally. "Ugly, painful gold, but gold." I just sat there, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the life I thought I had unravel in 1080p clarity. When Camille left and Mama went to bed, I stayed up staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. There was a time not so long ago when this kind of truth would have destroyed me. But tonight, it didn't. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it didn't break me. Because the woman sitting at that kitchen table wasn't the same one who'd fallen to the floor over a text message. She'd grown sharper, steadier, quieter in a powerful way. I walked out onto the porch. The night air wrapped around me, cool and still. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Derek thought he was untouchable. He thought he could play both sides and win. But he didn't count on me standing back up. He didn't count on women like Tasha stepping out of his shadows. He didn't count on the strength of someone who had already survived the worst part, the breaking. And that was his mistake. Healing doesn't arrive like a hurricane. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. It comes quietly like a soft rain after months of drought. Slow, reluctant, almost shy. I used to think healing would feel like power. Like waking up one morning and suddenly being free from the hurt. But the truth is, healing isn't a single moment. It's a series of small, fragile decisions. And the first one I made was this. I walked into therapy. Camille was the one who recommended Dr. May Chin. "She's good," she said. "Not the soft kind that just nods and says, hum. She'll make you face yourself, Simone, in the best way." I was skeptical. I'd grown up in a family where therapy wasn't something we talked about much. Mama believed in prayer, potlucks, and sitting on porches until your soul felt right again. And don't get me wrong, that worked for a lot of things. But betrayal like this, it sat too deep, too quiet, too sharp. So, one cool Friday morning, I found myself in the waiting room of Dr. Chin's office. My palms were damp. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the receptionist might hear it. I almost walked back out twice. But something, maybe that new part of me that had started to grow since that night in the kitchen, told me to stay. Dr. Chin's office didn't look like what I imagined therapy would be. No cold furniture, no blinding lights. Just soft earth tones, warm lamps, shelves of books, and a small trickling fountain in the corner that made the room feel like it was breathing. She was a petite woman in her late 40s, hair streaked with gray, wearing a teal cardigan and round glasses. Her voice was calm, but not weak. The kind of calm that made you feel safe enough to unravel. "Simone?" she said, smiling gently. "Come on in." I sat down on the couch, clutching a tissue I hadn't even realized I grabbed from the box. She waited, not for me to talk, for me to arrive. That was the thing about Dr. Chin. She never rushed my pain. She made space for it. "So," she said softly, "tell me why you're here." I stared at the floor, twisting the tissue between my fingers. My husband left me. Over text. She didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She just nodded slowly. And what did that moment feel like? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just the story, the feeling. Like the air got sucked out of the room, I whispered. Like everything I thought was solid turned into smoke, and I was floating. But not in a good way, in the kind of way that makes you realize no one's holding you anymore. She leaned forward slightly. "And who's holding you now?" I blinked. That question shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. "My mother," I said. "My friends, my lawyer, me." Her smile grew just a little. "That last one matters the most." Over the next hour, I told her everything: the notes, text, the money, the affair, Tasha, the USB drive, the confrontation on Mama's porch. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it. She let the story live in the air between us. And then she said something I didn't expect. "You're grieving." I frowned. "Grieving what?" "Everything. Your marriage, your trust, your future as you imagined it. Grief isn't just for the dead, Simone. It's for anything that dies, even the version of yourself you built around someone who left." That silence that followed was thick, heavy, true. I'd been so focused on surviving, on fighting, on collecting evidence and signing papers and looking strong, that I hadn't let myself grieve. Not really. And grief has a way of waiting for you. It doesn't leave until you sit down and let it speak. Therapy wasn't a straight line after that. Some sessions I sat there in silence. Others, I cried until my body felt emptied out like an old well. And some days, I laughed not because the pain was gone, but because I'd started to remember that joy could exist beside it. Dr. Chin helped me unpack the quiet betrayals too. The ones that didn't make it onto paper or USB drives. The small ways Derek had made me shrink. The way he'd dismiss my ideas at dinner parties. The way he'd roll his eyes when I talked about going back to school. The way he made me feel like my entire life was a supporting role in his. "You built your life around someone who kept shrinking your space," Dr. Chin said one day. "Now, you get to take that space back." Meanwhile, life outside her office kept moving. Camille was working the case like a woman on a mission. Mama kept feeding me like love came in the form of collard greens. Rhonda kept showing up with donuts and ridiculous jokes. And me? I started building small routines that didn't involve Derek's shadow. Every morning, I walked down the street with a cup of coffee and let the air hit my face. Every night, I journaled. Not perfectly, sometimes just a sentence or two, but they were my sentences. Today I didn't cry. Today I laughed at something dumb. Today I remembered I liked the smell of rain. They were small victories, but they mattered. "One session, doctor." Chin asked, "When was the last time you felt like yourself?" The question sat in my chest like a stone. I had to dig for the answer. I realized it wasn't during the marriage. Not really. It was before him. Before the compromises. Before the quiet erasures. I think I lost myself long before he left. I said, finally. She nodded. "And that means you get to find her now." Finding myself wasn't some grand montage like in the movies. It wasn't wine tastings or spontaneous trips to Paris. It was sitting on Mama's porch with a blanket, breathing. It was walking barefoot in the garden just because I could. It was rediscovering the woman who liked to dance in the kitchen for no reason at all. It was quiet, it was real, it was mine. One night, after a particularly heavy session, I came home and found Mama sitting at the kitchen table, mending one of her old shawls. The air smelled like chamomile tea and something warm baking in the oven. She didn't look up when she said, "You've been quieter lately." But it's a good quiet. I sat down across from her. "I'm just processing." She smiled without raising her head. "Processing means healing, baby. Don't rush it." And for once, I didn't try to. A few weeks later, Dr. Chin gave me homework. "Write a letter to the woman you were," she said. "Not to him. To her. The you who stayed, who loved, who broke." It sounded ridiculous at first. But that night, in my childhood bedroom, I sat down with a pen and wrote, "Dear me. You gave everything you had to a man who wasn't worthy of the woman you are. You bent yourself into corners so he could have space. You believed his silence was safety. You believed his lies were love. But you also survived him. You walked out with your head up. And you're learning to breathe again. I'm proud of you. I love you. I've got you now." By the time I finished, the tears that fell weren't the kind that burned. They were the kind that cleanse. Healing didn't erase the cracks, but it taught me how to fill them with gold. Like kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, they don't hide the cracks, they honor them. They make them part of the beauty. I was learning to do the same with myself. Derek would always be a part of my story. But he wouldn't be the whole story. The cracks he left behind weren't the end. They were where the light got in. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of my reflection. There comes a moment after the storm when the wind finally stills. The branches stop thrashing. The rain softens to a hush. And for the first time in a long time, you can hear your own heartbeat. That's what Chapter 8 of my life felt like. Not a big victory, not a grand comeback, just quiet. And inside that quiet, a seed started to grow. I'd spent months untangling myself from Derek legally, emotionally, spiritually. Camille was handling the courtroom side like a general with a polished sword. Dr. Chin was helping me peel back the layers of grief like onion skin. Mama was still my anchor, warm, unshakable, steady. But something was shifting inside me. One morning, I woke up before sunrise. The world was still wrapped in that blue-gray calm that only exists in the early hours. I padded out to the porch in my slippers, wrapped in one of Mama's shawls, with a cup of coffee in my hand. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. I looked out at the garden. Mama kept the hydrangeas, the herbs, the roses climbing over the old trellis. Even after storms, those flowers bloomed again. Not because the storm didn't happen, but because they were made to rise after it. And somewhere in that stillness, a thought bloomed in me. I want to build something of my own. It started small, a whisper, a thought that sat in the back of my head all day. By the time the sun set, it was a steady drumbeat. For years, I'd been Derek's support system. I helped him with his work. I kept our home running. I put my dreams on the back shelf because it wasn't the right time. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that I'd ever had dreams of my own. But they hadn't died. They were just buried. A few days later, Isaiah stopped by. Isaiah's been like family since high school, my cousin's best friend, who used to teach me how to fix things around the house. He now ran a small landscaping and maintenance business, and unlike Derek, he actually listened when I spoke. He was sipping sweet tea on Mama's porch when he said it. "You ever think about starting something of your own?" he asked casually, glancing at me over the rim of his cup. "Starting what?" He shrugged. "Anything. A business, a project, a dream. You've been holding up everybody else's world for years. Maybe it's time you build your own." I laughed at first. "Isaiah, I don't even know where to start." "Good," he said with a grin. "That means you're starting honest." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering a version of myself from years ago, the woman who once dreamed of starting a small community consulting service. Back then, I used to help small businesses organize their systems, train staff, and set up offices. I'd loved it, but when I married Derek, that dream slowly faded into the background of his ambitions. I whispered to the ceiling, "I want it back." And it was like saying those words out loud cracked something open inside me. The next morning, I grabbed a cheap spiral notebook and sat at the kitchen table. No plans, no perfect ideas, just pen on paper. My dream, help local businesses get organized. My skill, administration, structure, problem solving. My heart, building something that matters. And then I wrote one word in big, bold letters across the page: me. I wasn't just rebuilding a life after Derek. I was planting new roots. Of course, Mama noticed before I said anything. She always did. "What's that smile on your face?" she asked as she folded laundry. "Smile?" I said, feigning innocence. She said, side-eyeing me. "You got that look I used to get when your daddy and I decided to build this house." I laughed. "I'm not building a house, Mama." "No," she said, folding a towel with a soft grin. "You're building you, and that's even better." I told her about the idea, about the business, about the fear that came tangled up in it because dreaming again after being broken is terrifying. She listened, nodding the way only a mother who's already seen storms can nod. "You're not too old, you're not too late, and you're not too broken," she said. "That's the lie pain tells you. But look at you, you're already blooming." Her words sank into me like sunlight on damp soil. I started small, one step at a time. I took an online refresher course in business management. I made a simple budget. I reached out to 2 former coworkers for coffee and advice. I sketched out a name, Carter Consulting. I'd never felt so nervous. Or so alive. Every night, I journaled the steps, no matter how tiny. Registered the business name. Made a website draft. Called 3 people for advice. Didn't let fear win today. Rhonda, of course, was my biggest cheerleader. She showed up one evening with a bottle of cheap champagne and said, "Girl, we're celebrating the soft launch of your boss era." I rolled my eyes, but she popped the bottle anyway, spraying half of it on Mama's floor. Mama nearly chased her out with a dish towel. But we laughed so hard, it didn't matter. "Do you realize how powerful this is?" Rhonda said between giggles. "He tried to break you, and instead, you're about to build an empire." "Empire's a big word," I said. "Then start with a little queendom. She shot back. You're still the queen. In therapy, Dr. Chin noticed the shift almost immediately. You're sitting taller, she said, with a knowing smile. I just feel different. You're starting to dream again, she said. That's one of the last stages of healing. It's when you stop surviving and start living. Her words made me tear up. Not because they hurt, but because they rang true. But let me be clear. Planting new roots doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes easy. Fear still knocked on my door every night like an unwanted guest. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? What if everything falls apart again? But every time fear spoke, a louder voice whispered back, what if you fly? One evening, I sat on Mama's porch alone. The crickets were singing. The air was warm against my skin. I stared at the hydrangeas, the same ones that had weathered every storm and bloomed again. I whispered, I'm going to be okay. And for the first time, I didn't just hope it. I believed it. This wasn't about revenge against Derek. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. This was about choosing me, about giving myself the life I once thought I needed someone else to build for me. It was about planting something new where something old had died. And baby, the soil was rich. There's a certain kind of silence you feel before stepping into a courtroom. It's not peaceful. It's not empty. It's charged like the air before a summer storm breaks loose. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before my alarm. The sky outside was pale and gray, the kind of gray that holds its breath. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap, letting the reality sink in. Today, I would look Derek in the eyes again, but this time, not as his wife, as the woman standing on the other side of his lies. Mama was already up when I came downstairs. She had on her Sunday best dress, not because she was going anywhere fancy, but because, as she put it, we don't show up to battles looking broken. She handed me a warm biscuit wrapped in foil and a cup of coffee. Eat, she said firmly. Even warriors need breakfast. I smiled weakly. I'm not sure I can eat. You can, she said, her eyes locking on mine, because this isn't the day he wins. This is the day you stand. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't walking into that courtroom begging for crumbs. I was walking in to claim what was mine. Camille met us outside the courthouse steps at 8:30 sharp. She was a vision of quiet power in her tailored navy suit, binder in one hand, calm in the other. You ready? She asked. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded. And she gave me a small smile, the kind a surgeon gives before a difficult operation. Precise, confident, steady. Let's remind him who he underestimated, she said. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just the air, the atmosphere. Echoes of footsteps on the polished floor. The faint smell of old paper and coffee. Strangers brushing past with their own storms tucked under their coats. And then I saw him. Derek stood near the clerk's desk, wearing the same cologne he used to wear when we went out for anniversaries. For a split second, that scent tried to drag me backward. Back to our kitchen, back to the woman who believed in promises. But then I remembered the text. Don't call or come over, we're done. And just like that, the spell broke. He looked good. Of course he did. Crisp suit, clean shave, polished smile. But I saw it now, the performance, every detail calculated. A man who thought he could charm a judge the way he once charmed me. When his eyes met mine, he smirked. That same smirk he wore when he thought he was one step ahead. But this time, I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze steady, calm, unbothered. His smile faded first. We took our seats at the petitioner's table. Camille laid out her files like chess pieces. I sat with my hands folded, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way Dr. Chin had taught me. On the other side of the room, Derek's attorney, a slick, silver-tongued man in a charcoal suit, leaned in to whisper to him. Derek nodded, but I could see it in the tightness of his jaw. He wasn't as composed as he wanted the world to believe. When the bailiff called the courtroom to order, everything slowed. The judge entered, robes flowing, voice steady as stone. "This court is now in session." My heart pounded. But beneath the pounding, something else pulsed. Strength. Camille opened with precision. She spoke like a woman who had spent her life turning chaos into clarity. "Your Honor," she began, "this is a case of a man who not only abandoned his marriage but actively sought to strip my client of her dignity, security, and financial stability. Fortunately, he left a trail." Her voice didn't shake. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. She laid it all out, the $4,200 withdrawal, the hotel receipts, the affair with Tasha, the evidence on the USB drive. Every date, every transaction, every lie. Each one landing like a hammer on cold stone. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then it was his attorney's turn. And like clockwork, he played the tired old song. My client felt emotionally neglected. He was trapped in a loveless marriage. He simply wanted a new beginning. I almost laughed. A new beginning that involved draining our savings and sneaking around hotels? But I didn't speak. I didn't interrupt. I just watched him spin his web, calm as the eye of a storm, because here's the thing about lies. When they're up against the truth, they always sound cheap. The judge leaned forward, peering over her glasses. "Mr. Carter, did you withdraw $4,200 from your joint account 3 hours before sending your wife a text message ending the marriage?" Derek shifted again. I needed the money to get my own place." Camille rose smoothly. "With respect, Your Honor, the funds in question were used at a hotel where Mr. Carter stayed with another woman. We have receipts. We also have voice recordings, messages, and—" "That's enough," Derek's lawyer snapped. Camille didn't even glance his way. "Not yet," she said coolly. The courtroom rippled with quiet tension. And for the first time, Derek didn't look so composed anymore. When it was my turn to speak, my palms were slick with sweat. My legs felt like water. But when I stood, I felt Mama's eyes on me from the bench behind. Rhonda, too. My village had shown up not with casseroles this time, but with silent strength. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said gently, "you may share your statement." I took a breath so deep it hurt, and then I spoke. "On the night my husband ended our marriage," I began, "I was cooking dinner. I thought we were building a life. Instead, he sent me 6 words that broke it. I didn't get a conversation. I didn't get a goodbye. I got a text." My voice wavered for a second, not out of weakness, but because I let it be real. "I'm not here to beg," I continued. "I'm here because I worked for that home, for that money, for that life, and I refuse to let someone take what I helped build because they decided to leave." The courtroom was silent. Even his lawyer stopped fidgeting. The judge nodded slowly. She wasn't the type to show emotion easily, but I saw the flicker of respect in her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter." When she turned back to Derek, her tone sharpened. "Mr. Carter, it is clear from the evidence presented that you acted in bad faith both financially and personally. This court will not reward recklessness." My knees almost gave out from the weight of that sentence. I didn't win yet, but the wind was shifting. The ruling came later, that afternoon. Temporary orders. I was granted exclusive use of the house. Derek was ordered to pay temporary spousal support. All accounts were to be frozen and divided under court supervision. He was barred from removing or selling any marital property. And for the first time since everything began, he was the one walking away empty-handed. He didn't look at me when the judge banged the gavel. He just stared at the floor, hands clenched. His lawyer whispered something, but Derek didn't respond. His performance had cracked, and the truth had taken center stage. As we left the courthouse, the air outside felt different, lighter, warmer, like spring sunlight after a long winter. Rhonda practically skipped down the steps, muttering, "Whew, that man looked like someone took his last chicken wing." Mama walked beside me, her hand wrapped around mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her squeeze said it all. "You stood your ground, baby." And Camille? She just smiled her quiet warrior smile. "That was only round one," she said. But I'd say it went beautifully. That night, I sat on Mama's porch with a cup of tea. No fireworks, no music, just the crickets and the wind through the trees. For the first time since Derek's text, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not triumph, power. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be real. I whispered to the night, "I'm not afraid anymore." The storm had met the woman it thought it could drown, and she was still standing. There are some places that hold your story inside their walls. Every corner remembers. Every room hums with echoes both soft and sharp. My house was one of those places. It had once been the heart of my marriage, the place where we shared our first Christmas, where I painted the walls with dreams, where I built routines around someone who eventually broke me. But after the court hearing, it was no longer ours, it was mine. The day the keys were officially turned back over to me, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Not because I was scared to go inside, but because stepping through that door meant facing every ghost I'd tried so hard to outrun. The house was quiet, still, waiting. The paint on the front door was chipped near the bottom, a little detail that once annoyed me. Now it felt symbolic. Imperfect, survived, still standing, just like me. I turned the key slowly, the metal sliding into the lock with a click that felt louder than it should have. My hand shook a little, not out of weakness, but from the weight of everything this moment meant. When the door swung open, the air inside hit me like a memory. The first thing I saw was the living room, the place where I'd sat countless nights waiting for Derek to come home. The beige couch still faced the TV. The rug was slightly crooked. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, like a stain that refused to leave. For a second, I almost couldn't move. Grief and strength sat side by side inside me like two old enemies forced to share a chair. I whispered into the empty space, "You don't own me anymore." And then I walked inside. Mama had insisted on coming with me, but I told her I wanted to do this part alone. I needed to face these walls without a hand to hold, to let the silence and I finally meet each other. I walked room to room, slow, deliberate. The kitchen, the hallway, our old bedroom. Each space held a flash of memory. His laugh at the counter, the fight in the hallway. The night I stood here with my phone in my hand, my heart breaking over a text message. And yet, under all of that, there was something else. Me. I had been here too. I had existed here long before I knew pain like this. This house wasn't a graveyard. It was ground, and I could build something on it again. The first thing I did was open every window, every single 1. Light poured in, soft at first, then stronger. A breeze rolled through, carrying the scent of the magnolia tree outside. I walked through each room, letting the air chase out the shadows, peeling away the heaviness one window latch at a time. I said out loud, "You don't get to keep this space." Not to Derek, not to the pain, to the silence itself. Later that afternoon, my village showed up because of course they did. Mama with her basket of cleaning supplies and candles. Rhonda with a playlist and a bottle of wine. Aunt Jo with paint samples. Trina and Val with casseroles, because apparently, in the South, no life change is official without food. They didn't tiptoe around my memories. They marched through that house like women on a mission. "Where do we start?" Rhonda asked, hands on her hips. "The bedroom," I said. "Then let's burn that damn rug," she declared. And just like that, we got to work. We scrubbed, dusted, washed, painted, rearranged. Every brushstroke, every wipe of a sponge, every song blaring through the Bluetooth speaker was a small act of taking back my life. We painted over the beige walls with warm, soft white. We pulled down the heavy curtains and let the light flood in. We donated the furniture that held too many memories. At one point, Mama turned to me and said, "This house is breathing again." And she was right, but more importantly, so was I. When we got to the bedroom, I froze for a moment at the door. This was the room that had held so much love, lies, quiet heartbreak, silence so loud it felt like a scream. Rhonda saw my hesitation. She didn't say anything. She just took the comforter, yanked it off the bed, and tossed it straight into the garbage bag. "There," she said. "Step 1. We replaced everything. The sheets, the rug, even the lamp that once glowed while I waited up alone." It was no longer a room where I was forgotten. It became my room, my sanctuary. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the middle of the living room. It smelled like lemon, cleaner, candles, and something new hope. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by open windows and the soft hum of the night. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wrap around me. This was my house now, not the house of betrayal. The house of becoming. Over the next few weeks, I built new rituals inside those walls. Morning coffee on the porch, music in the kitchen while I cooked dinner for myself, not for anyone else. Fresh flowers on the dining table. Journaling by the window where the light hit just right. Slowly, the ghosts faded, and what was left was me. I remember the first night I slept in my bed, alone, after reclaiming the house. No weight beside me, no late-night arguments, no waiting for someone who wasn't coming. I lay there under soft new sheets, staring at the ceiling, and instead of crying, I smiled, because this silence didn't hurt anymore. It healed, Doctor. Chin called it reclaiming your narrative. "Your house isn't just walls, Simone," she told me. "It's a mirror. For a long time, it reflected the story you shared with him. But now, it reflects you." She was right. Every new piece of furniture, every photo I hung on the wall, every scented candle I lit, it was all part of building something that belonged to no one but me. The biggest change came one Saturday morning. Isaiah came over with tools, and together we tore down the old shelves Derek had built in the garage, the ones he used to fill with his tools, his trophies, his clutter. I replaced them with a long, clean wooden workbench, not for his hobbies, for my business. Boss woman setup, Isaiah teased, wiping sweat from his forehead. I laughed. Something like, that. That workbench became my little HQ for Carter Consulting. The same house that once held me hostage in my own silence was now the birthplace of my next chapter. Weeks later, I hosted my first dinner there. Just Mama, Rhonda, Aunt Jo, Trina, and Val, my people. We sat around my table, candles lit, jazz playing low in the background, plates of food spread out like we were celebrating a holiday, because in a way, we were. We were celebrating my return home. Mama lifted her glass and said, "To my baby, to the woman who walked out of the storm and came home to herself." My throat tightened. Tears prickled. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from pride. We clinked glasses and laughter filled the house. Real laughter. The kind that builds walls stronger than bricks. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood at the front door and looked around one last time before bed. The house was no longer heavy. The walls didn't hum with old echoes. They whispered something new. You made it back. And this time, it's all yours. I walked up the stairs, flicked off the lights, and let the darkness hold me. Not as a woman abandoned, but as a woman home. When I first whispered the idea of starting my own business, it felt like holding a matchstick in a hurricane. A fragile spark, easy to doubt, easy to snuff out. But standing inside my freshly reclaimed house, something shifted. This time, I wasn't whispering anymore. I was building. It started at my kitchen table, not some sleek office, not a rented co-working space. Just me, my laptop, a spiral notebook, and a stubborn little flame inside my chest that refused to die. For years, I'd helped Derek build his world. I'd balanced the books, organized the paperwork, scheduled meetings, and kept the house together like invisible thread. I used to joke that I ran a small empire without ever getting my name on the door. Well, now my name was going on the door. I named it Carter Consulting, not for him, but for me, because the name I'd once shared in silence was about to mean something new. It would no longer be tied to his betrayal. It would be tied to my rebirth. Isaiah came over to help me convert the garage into a mini home office. We moved in a sturdy wooden desk, a second-hand office chair, some shelves from a thrift store, and strung soft white lights along the walls. When we were done, the space didn't look like much. But to me, it looked like possibility. The first days were quiet, unremarkable to anyone else. But to me, they were monumental. I made a list of services, administrative structure, workflow systems, team training, small business consulting. Nothing fancy. Just what I was good at. I bought a domain. I built a simple website. I opened a business bank account. Little steps, quiet steps, powerful steps. Each night, I'd close my laptop with a small smile and whisper to myself, "We're getting there." I remember the first client call. It was a Tuesday morning, warm sunlight spilling through the garage windows. I wore a crisp white blouse, even though nobody on Zoom would see more than my shoulders. I wanted to feel like the woman I was becoming. The client was a local bakery owner named Michelle. She was overwhelmed with orders, staff schedules, and inventory. By the end of the call, she said, "I don't know what kind of magic you just worked, but I already feel less lost." When I hung up, I just sat there staring at my laptop screen, tears welling up in my eyes, not because it was some huge victory, but because someone trusted me to help, and I knew I could. Of course, fear didn't just disappear. Every invoice I sent out carried a whisper of doubt. Every late-night spreadsheet was shadowed by a question, what if this doesn't work? But I pushed forward anyway. Because fear was no longer the one driving my life. I was. Mama was my unofficial CFO, even though she had no idea what a spreadsheet was. She'd walk into my little garage office with coffee and say, "How's my CEO doing today?" Trying not to mess this up, I'd reply. She'd give me that look, the one only mothers can give. Baby, you already survived worse than a business plan. You'll figure this out. And she was right. Rhonda was my hype woman. She made business cards for me before I even asked. Because bosses have cards, she said, sliding them across the table like they were golden tickets. I laughed so hard, I cried. But behind her jokes, she believed in me fiercely. She'd seen me broken. And now she was watching me build something from those pieces. The first real test came about 2 months in. Michelle, the bakery owner, recommended me to a small furniture company. They wanted a total systems overhaul, inventory, scheduling, process. A big job, bigger than anything I'd taken on before. When I got the email, I stared at it for a full hour. I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay small, safe, comfortable. But then I remembered something Dr. Chin once told me. Growth isn't supposed to feel cozy, it's supposed to stretch you. So I said yes, even though my hands were shaking as I typed the reply. That project consumed my days and nights for weeks. I built flowcharts, trained staff, organized back-end systems. I worked harder than I had in years, but this time, it was on my own terms. No one was taking the credit. No one was controlling the narrative. When the project wrapped up, the owner, Mr. Daniel Reyes, shook my hand and said, "You've changed how we run our business. Thank you." That handshake was worth more than gold. Because it was the moment I realized this wasn't just survival anymore. This was thriving. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. A dentist's office, a local floral shop, a family-owned car wash, people who needed help keeping their small businesses afloat. And somehow, they all ended up in my inbox. I wasn't just helping people build systems. I was helping them breathe again, and in doing that, I was learning to breathe too. Mama threw me a little grand opening party in the backyard even though the business was already running. She hung fairy lights, made her famous sweet tea, and invited everyone who had stood by me through the storm. I don't want a big thing, I had told her. She'd just waved me off. Baby, you walked through fire. We're gonna light up this backyard. When I stood there that night, surrounded by people who loved me not for what I could do for them, but for who I was, something deep inside me clicked into place. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by Derek. I wasn't defined by heartbreak. I was defined by me. Isaiah raised his glass. To Simone. The woman who thought the storm would end her, but it just watered the ground she's building on. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. Because they were true. I didn't just rebuild a life. I planted a forest. One night after the party, I sat alone in my office. The soft light from my desk lamp spilled across invoices, notebooks, sticky notes, and a little framed quote Rhonda had given me. "You are not too late. You are right on time." I let that line sink into my bones. I wasn't late. Not to love, not to life, not to me. A few weeks later, I got my first major check, the kind of payment that once seemed impossible for me to earn on my own. I sat in my car holding the envelope, crying the kind of tears that didn't hurt. The kind of tears that heal. Because once upon a time, a man told me I was a burden. And now, I was building something he could never take away from me. Dr. Chin smiled when I told her about the growth of the business. "You've moved from survival to creation," she said softly. "That's the final stage of reclaiming your life. You're not just living without him, you're living fully as you." Her words hit me deep, because I realized she was right. I wasn't just standing again. I was soaring. Running Carter Consulting didn't make everything easy. I still had hard days, lonely days, days where the silence felt too loud. But unlike before, I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. I had saved myself. On the 3-month anniversary of my business launch, I took Mama out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just her favorite soul food spot downtown. Over collard greens and cornbread, she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "I've always been proud of you. But now, baby, I think you're proud of you too." And that was everything. There are days that feel like they've been waiting for you, quietly, patiently, just sitting at the edge of your story, waiting for you to arrive. The day of the final divorce hearing was one of those days. It wasn't the kind of morning filled with panic. It wasn't the storm I'd imagined it would be months ago when Derek sent me that text. It was calm, a different kind of calm, the kind that comes when you've already survived the worst. I woke up before the Sunday. The house was still and warm, the way it always is before the world starts moving. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands on my knees, breathing, not shaking, not crying, just breathing. This wasn't the same woman who once collapsed on the kitchen floor, holding her phone, staring at a message that shattered her world. This woman was steady, rooted, whole. Mama was already in the kitchen, of course. She had on her favorite earrings, the ones she wore on important days. I smiled when I saw her because she didn't need to say anything. Her presence said it all. She handed me a mug of coffee. "Today's not about him, baby. It's about you." "I know," I whispered. And I meant it. For so long, the idea of this day had been tangled up with grief. But standing there in that quiet kitchen, I realized this wasn't the ending of my story. It was the signing off of a chapter I'd already outgrown. Camille met us at the courthouse steps at exactly 9 sharp, calm, polished, ready for war. But I wasn't afraid of battle anymore. I wasn't walking in to fight for a life. I was walking in to close a door I no longer needed open. "Big day," Camille said, adjusting her jacket. "Big day," I echoed with a soft smile. The courthouse felt different this time. Not cold and echoing like before. Not a place of fear. It felt like the place where I would finally lay down the weight I'd been carrying. And then I saw him. Derek was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than it should have. Same polished shoes, same cologne, same performative posture. But he wasn't the same to me anymore. When his eyes met mine, I didn't feel that familiar twist in my chest. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel love. I felt nothing, and that nothing was beautiful. "Mrs. Carter," his lawyer greeted me stiffly. "Miss Carter," Camille corrected sharply, before I could open my mouth. That small correction echoed in the hallway. "Miss, not Mrs." I didn't belong to anyone anymore. Derek's jaw tightened. Just a flicker, but I saw it. He wasn't used to me standing taller than him. Too bad. That was the new normal. We stepped into the courtroom. The same walls, the same judge. But a completely different woman sitting at that petitioner's table. I no longer held my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. I rested them flat on the table, steady, calm, ready. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered. "Final hearing," she said, glancing down at the file. "Carter versus Carter." Those words used to sting. Now, they didn't even scratch. Derek's attorney went first. He did what attorneys do, tried to make him sound like a man who made a few mistakes, but deserved fairness. I barely listened. His words didn't belong to my world anymore. Camille rose next, and if power had a sound, it would have been her voice that day. She spoke clearly, deliberately. "Your Honor, my client has spent this entire process regaining what was hers to begin with. We're not here to negotiate pain. We're here to finalize justice. Every point was laid out like a map. The house was already in my name. The financial division was clear. The evidence of his betrayal recorded and undeniable. The months of silence where he thought he'd broken me. Camille wasn't just presenting facts, she was telling the truth. And truth, when spoken without apology, is louder than any lie." The judge turned to Derek. "Do you have anything to say before I finalize this?" He cleared his throat. That same old practiced charm laced his voice. "Your Honor, I just want to say, this wasn't supposed to happen. I made mistakes. But I loved her. Camille rose smoothly. "Your Honor, with respect, the time for sentiment has long passed." The judge nodded once. Derek's words fell flat. Because they weren't meant for the court, they were meant for me. But I didn't bite, I didn't roll my eyes, I didn't cry, I didn't look away. I just met his gaze with a calm, quiet strength. And that was the loudest thing in the room. When the judge signed the papers, the sound of the pen scratching across the page echoed louder than any gavel I'd ever heard. Just like that. It was done. Years of marriage ended in ink. But for me, this wasn't an ending. This was freedom written down in black and white. I walked out of that courtroom with Camille on one side and Mama on the other. The autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was walking toward something. Toward myself. Derek caught up with me on the steps. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just stood there, staring at me like a man who finally realized the weight of what he'd lost. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said quietly. I turned to him. Not the man I once loved. Not the man who betrayed me. Just a man standing in front of the woman who no longer belonged to his story. "It ended the day you sent that text," I said softly. "Today just made it official." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. Back home, the first thing I did was put the signed decree in a drawer. Not on display, not as a trophy. Just filed away like an old receipt proof of a transaction long done. Then I stood in the living room of the house I'd fought for. The house that once echoed with his voice. Now, it only echoed with mine. I whispered to the walls, to the silence, to myself. We made it. That night, Mama cooked my favorite meal: collard greens, cornbread, and fried chicken. She set the table like it was a holiday. Rhonda came over with a bottle of wine. Isaiah brought flowers. It wasn't a party. It wasn't about celebrating him being gone. It was about celebrating me being here. We laughed. We cried. But this time, they were tears of release. Later, when everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch alone. The crickets were singing, the moon hung low and quiet. I held a cup of tea between my hands, letting the warmth seep in. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt peace. I survived the storm. I learned how to rebuild. And now, the chapter was closed. Dr. Chin once told me, closure doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you decide it's over. That night, I finally understood what she meant. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his validation. I didn't even need him to understand what he lost. All I needed was me. And I had her again. The thing no one tells you about starting over is this: it doesn't come with fireworks, it doesn't announce itself with trumpets or marching bands. Sometimes a new beginning arrives softly, in the quiet, in the morning light, in the way your heart exhales without fear for the first time in years. That's how mine came. 6 months had passed since the final hearing. 6 months since the ink dried and the storm that once consumed my life finally moved on. And in those months, something beautiful happened. I became myself again. Not the woman who loved Derek. Not the woman he betrayed. Not even the woman who fought for her survival. I became the woman who lived for herself. My days look different now. Not rushed, not chaotic, peaceful, intentional. I woke up early most mornings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make coffee, step out onto the porch, and watch the world slowly stretch awake. The magnolia tree outside bloomed again. The light hit the porch railing the same way it always had. But everything felt different, because this time I wasn't waiting for someone to come home. This time I was already home. Carter Consulting had grown beyond what I'd ever dared to imagine in those early garage days. I had 5 steady clients now, a little team of part-time assistants. My first official office space downtown, nothing fancy, but mine. I even hung a framed sign on the wall that said, "You built this." Because I had. Every late night, every shaky, yes, every small win had added up to something solid, something real, something that belonged to no one but me. I still wore my wedding ring for weeks after the separation, not out of love, but out of habit. One day, a few months ago, I slipped it off without ceremony. I didn't cry. I didn't clutch it to my chest. I just placed it gently in a little box on my dresser. And in that moment, I realized it had stopped meaning anything. Freedom doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the quiet removal of a ring. Mama had noticed the shift in me before I ever said a word. She saw it in the way I stood, in the way I laughed, in the way I no longer hesitated to take up space. "You're glowing," she said one evening over sweet tea on the porch. I laughed. "I'm just living." She squeezed my hand. Exactly. Rhonda joked that I was in my soft life era. She wasn't wrong. There was a gentleness to my days now. A softness that came from no longer fighting to prove my worth to someone who couldn't see it. I no longer tiptoed around someone else's moods. I no longer swallowed my joy just to keep the peace. I no longer lived in a house built on broken promises. I lived in my own. The text that started it all, "Don't call or come over, we're done," had once been the sharpest knife in my chest. Now it was just a memory. A moment that used to hurt, but no longer had power over me. What he thought was the end of my world was simply the end of my illusion. The real world, my world, was waiting on the other side of that text. And my reply? Got it. That wasn't surrender. That was the beginning. One Friday afternoon, as I wrapped up work at the office, Isaiah stopped by. He leaned against the door frame with that easy smile of his, holding 2 iced coffees. "For the CEO," he said, handing me one. "You're ridiculous," I said, but I couldn't stop smiling. "You know," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "I've known you a long time, but I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Free." The word hung in the air between us like soft sunlight. Free. I didn't respond with some big speech. I just smiled. Because he was right. A few weeks later, I did something small but symbolic. I changed my phone number. I'd been carrying the same number since before I even met Derek. And every time I saw his name, even blocked lingering in my call history, it felt like a thread tying me to a foreign version of me I no longer was. So I sat in the corner of a little cafe, hit confirm, and just like that, the old number was gone. No grand goodbye, no second guessing, just clean air. And in that moment, I swear it felt like shedding the last piece of the storm. That night, I drove to the river. It wasn't planned, I just went. The water shimmered under the moonlight. The air was soft, still warm from the day. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the bank, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought about the woman I was that night in the kitchen, staring at her phone, trying to make sense of a 6-word text that felt like the end of her world. She was scared, she was broken. She thought she'd never breathe the same way again. And here I was on the other side, breathing deeper than I ever had. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, not to the pain, to me, for not giving up, for standing up when my knees were shaking, for walking through the fire and refusing to let it define me. I didn't just survive him, I became myself again. The next morning, I woke up early before the sun and decided to go for a run. I hadn't done that in years. My feet hit the pavement softly, steady, strong. The streets were quiet. The sky was pale gold, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was running towards something. My future, my peace, my power. Later that afternoon, as I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, Mama joined me. She didn't say anything at first. We just sat together in the soft quiet. "You did it," she finally whispered. "Did what?" "Came back to yourself." I felt the tears well up, but they weren't heavy. They were light, like rain that feeds the soil. "Yeah," I said softly. "I did. Doctor Chin once told me that healing isn't about erasing the story, it's about owning it, and I do. Every chapter, the love, the lies, the pain, the fight, the rise. This story isn't about a man who broke me. It's about a woman who found herself again. If someone asked me now, would you take it all back? The answer would be no. Because without the storm, I would have never learned how strong my roots really were. I would have never built this life. I would have never met this version of me. The text that ended my marriage was just 6 words. Don't call or come over. We're done. But my story, my real story, began with 2. Got it. And those 2 words carried me farther than I ever thought I could go. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.